good afternoon. This is Richard Shu, host of Shu Untied. Today, I'm very thrilled and honored to have with me as my guest Catherine O'Connell from Japan, who's also the principal and founder of Catherine O'Connell Law Firm, also on the board of directors at Toyota and Fujitsu, also a podcast host. Catherine, welcome to the program.
Super pleased to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
So, Catherine, I know, of course, you have your own podcast, so I feel a little bit like I'm interviewing the interviewer. So we'll see how this goes.
I feel like the interviewed interviewer. So I'm with you on that. Don't worry.
Well, Catherine, let me start by asking you really how you got from being a lawyer in New Zealand to being in Japan and to being on the board of, two of the largest Japanese companies. I realize it's a long history, but, kind of walk me through how you got to this position.
Yeah, it is a long one, so I'll try and go a little bit shorter. But my first career was in tourism, and I got a lot of questions from my clients. Many of them were lawyers in New Zealand on their honeymoon. They asked me questions about the law. How is the legal system set up? How do the courts deal with troublemakers, etc.? And so it was through that I went back home and studied up on things that I didn't know, so that I could talk about these things. And it was through that I found that it was really something that I liked and I was drawn to it. At the same time, I also had a mentor who encouraged me to go back to law school, right? I went into a tourism job straight from school. So go back to law school and learn, do law, become a Japanese speaking lawyer, and you will have it sold for the rest of your life. Well, that person predicted probably one of the most amazing things, and it has really been a magic formula to have law and Japanese. So when I left law school, I joined a law firm that were looking specifically to advise into Japanese corporates that were basing themselves in New Zealand, the likes of Mitsui, Mitsubishi, Marubeni, those big trading company names that had set up office in New Zealand. So I joined them, and that also led to 7 years of experience in New Zealand, working in very broad areas, as well as my niche, which is more commercial corporate law. So I got an opportunity to come to Japan, and it was a 1-year contract. So, lawyers hedging their bets, low risk, 1-year contract. I can go to Japan and see what it's really like, and then go back to New Zealand and carry on the associate partner path if I want to. Well, that's 20 years ago now, Richard. So I've been here a long time. And each thing that I've done has built up to build towards these board positions. So what I did was the first job was with Olympus Corporation. They make endoscopes and of course cameras and lenses. And from there, I really got into manufacturing as a niche for myself. Companies that make things. Right. And so from there, I moved to Panasonic in Osaka. They also, of course, as you know, make many items. And so I found that I was really a good lawyer who could understand the way products are put together, the things that might go wrong, how to protect them in contracts, and how to negotiate around, different organizations, different industries, but within manufacturing. So meanwhile, all my friends are in big corporate jobs, perhaps earning lots of money, and I'm a kind of Cinderella, I would say, in my work. But it worked out to be the best thing for me because it has absolutely led to these board positions. Toyota and Fujitsu both wanted a person who was a lawyer, who wasn't an M&A expert, who wasn't somebody who had gone and done 1,000 deals. I've done a few, but not that many. They wanted somebody who could understand the manufacturing process, who knew the cogs within a Japanese organization, the supply chain, the finance teams, the procurement people, QA, all of those things and how they all fit together. And that's just been my life. So I didn't know that the destiny was going to be the glass slipper for the Cinderella in those two companies, but it has been. So they asked me to come in. I needed Japanese language. I also needed to be able to read and write Japanese. Well, not write so much as understand the documents, right? The pre-reads and the documents at the board meetings are in Japanese and the discussions are in Japanese. There are some English translations, but it's really, you need to be able to be conversant in Japanese. So I had those kinds of I guess, the checklist of items that they needed,
Yeah.
the experience in law, compliance and governance, and risk management, as well as those skills that I've just mentioned, that really brought it all together. And there weren't really other many competitors for this role or these roles, because there's nobody really doing it. Nobody really, as a lawyer in Japan, has concentrated in this manufacturing industry. And it's come full circle, and here I am on these boards. So I was selected, found, picked up, and at the right timing, brought in. So Fujitsu was from June 2022, and Toyota this year, June 2023.
Interesting. Now, how long did it take you to perfect Japanese to a point where you could be, you know, the competency level you're talking about?
I would say I'm not. I'm not perfect, but I did do 2 years full time concentrating on the language back in New Zealand before I did the tourism industry work. So it consolidated in the practical side of things with speaking it every day on the full-time 2-year course that I did. And I think if you're learning a language, you can't sort of go to a country and learn it just ad hoc. You really need to concentrate on it. So that's what I did as a first step. And then in Japan, you just have to build on it. I've been building on it since I arrived in 2002. And it just gets better and better. So my writing skills that were really great, I used to be able to write letters to people in Japanese, handwriting. Now it's very much on computer, of course, but it's being able to recognize the language and being able to converse. And I think it's practice, and practice. But you've got to have a great grounding in it first.
So just out of curiosity, could we have done this interview in Japanese?
Yes, of course.
Oh, interesting. Wow. Okay, that's impressive. What interested you in Japan to begin with? You said you were interested in there. You went there as a tourist. And you went so what was the interest just kind of at the very beginning? Was it a childhood thing, or how did you get into Japan to begin with?
I often joke that it was I like Japanese sake, but it's not that.
Okay.
It was an interest in working in tourism. That was really it, because there was a fantastically big boom in tourism in New Zealand at the time. So this is 1985, 86. There were many Japanese coming to New Zealand. They were spending a lot of money. They needed people. I thought that would be quite a good job, and my career would be excellent because I could do lots of things. I could go and visit the countryside that I probably have never even seen myself, even as a New Zealander. And so that was the draw card, was to go in to do tourism and do a travel agency diploma, which I did at the same time. However, it just blossomed into more from that. So it was really tourism, but then having language is one thing, Richard, but needing it, having language is one thing, but connecting it with another skill, that's the key. So becoming a Japanese speaking something, or a German speaking something, right? A doctor or an engineer or something like that. So I realized doing Japanese and going and joining friends and tourists, jumping, bungee jumping and landing on glaciers is fun, but it's not really going to sustain me my whole life. It's great fun, I tell you. So I needed to switch, right? I needed to do something else. So I went to law.
But there wasn't something specific about, I mean, you kind of picked Japan randomly. I mean, it could have been China, it could have been a European country for the tourism part of it, or was there something about the Japanese?
No, I think it was really, that's a really, really good question. I think it was the tourism thing that drew me in. And when I went to research about what I could do in tourism, the person across the counter actually said, Japanese is a really great skill to have. And someone who has Japanese now would be really great. So I think perhaps that's where it was like, oh, okay. I remember going home to my parents and saying, I'm going to study tourism and Japanese. And they were like, yeah, okay, sounds good. No pushback. So, that's always a good thing.
Well, what was kind of your first, I mean, the Japanese culture is obviously very different. I'm assuming you didn't know much about it when you started. What was kind of your first reaction, coming from New Zealand and learning about the Japanese culture?
I guess my first thing was when I remember being in the very first class, and I had studied French at school, and I was a disaster in French. But for some reason, French decided to come out, and I couldn't get my words around Japanese. So when I tried to say the basics of cat and dog, I had French words coming out. So I realized after a while you had to sort of push that over to the side in your brain somehow and start. But the thing I love about Japanese language is it's not purely a language such as English. It's got a bounty of culture built into the words and the way you structure sentences, the things you say. And so it was more a drawing in there to the culture that surrounded wrapped around the language that made it so interesting. You know, the things that you don't say, the things that you leave a sentence tailing off and people are expected to understand. So as I built that up, I became more and more curious about the language because of the culture interface. Yeah.
So who was the one that exactly suggested that you become a lawyer? I mean, you were doing tourism. That seems very far afield. How did that person suggest? Who suggested it, and how did what made you decide to follow this suggestion?
I would say that person is either a mentor or an angel. I'm not sure who crosses your path. I think we have these people in our life and we never really know who they are until later when we look back. So in the mirror, when I look back, I realized a male for one thing, and also Japanese. So that's quite remarkable that a Japanese male, perhaps people wouldn't look to somebody like that or think somebody, maybe some unconscious bias towards male Japanese, but he was the one. So he had done law at Keio University, a private university in Japan, and had said, you know, law's a great place to be. And I was just unsure because I've got nobody who's done law in my family. My dad's an engineer, which leads to the manufacturing side of things and the interest. But I didn't know that was possible. So it was somebody, and we need these people in our lives who tell us the things and see the things in us that we don't see. And said, you're so good at Japanese, you could just lend it to law and help all these Japanese people who are coming to New Zealand to set up business, but they're struggling because of the language. So if you can tie the two together, you'd be a great lawyer who can speak Japanese. So he inspired me. So I gave up the JTB job, Japan Travel Bureau. A lot of people around me said, that's so stupid. What are you doing going to university when you're in this great job? Those people then, when I graduated, were the ones who sent me clients and came to me as clients, Japanese people, who then saw the benefit of it. And that was just a really incredible circle there.
Well, what was your first reaction when you first suggested? Did you like immediately think, "Oh, this is a great idea"? Or did you? What, I mean, how did you come around to this? How did you come around to thinking that it was a good idea?
I think it was probably just a convincing and being very young, being 20, 21 years old and just thinking, okay, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? And I suppose taking a bet on myself, which has probably been key all the way through my life, and setting up the practice that I've got in Japan now was also taking a bet on myself. But there's also people who encourage you, and he was one of those. And I think probably said it many times to me, you can do it, why not? Next year, the year here for university starts in February. Okay, so that's after our summer. It starts in February. So it was easy enough to think about it a few months ahead and, resign and do all of that process and enroll. And once I'd done it, I think it was really good. The other thing that helped to ease in is I did a couple of papers, a couple of courses part-time while I was still working. And that gave me a taste of university life. So that helped as well. Yeah.
What did you think about law school? Did you like it? What did you think?
I don't think I liked it. Oh gosh, you've got me in the honesty zone right now. I think it wasn't what I thought it would be. It wasn't like TV programs where they're all sitting there and being asked questions and it's really cool and fun and you meet people and you go and do groovy things. It was kind of more not boring, but I would say very run-of-the-mill, day by day by day. And I think I judged that a lot on the first year course, which was pretty standard. It was only until I got into the second and third year and fourth year courses that it became interesting. I could do company law, equity, insurance, or sale of goods and things like that, which made it interesting. But that first year course almost turned me away, but I stuck at it.
And you knew right away, or you stayed focused on going back to Japan, or what? Or did you ever think I'll just stay in New Zealand, or what? Were you sure, absolutely sure to go back to Japan?
Oh, so my courses in law were in New Zealand, right? Then I joined a law firm there, came here. So I think as each opportunity has fronted up in front of me, right? Opportunity lands, and there's a big symbol etched on the door that says push. So each time I've had a new opportunity come up, Richard, I've just pushed the door. I haven't had a 10 or 5 or 3 year plan. I've just pushed the door, opened it up, had a look at the opportunity and it's been great. So
Yeah.
each job has been something that's just come on my path, and I've
Yeah.
taken it or thought, that doesn't feel right. So it
Totally.
could be an emotional decision as well as a practical, theoretical approach as well, a combination.
Mm. When
So
you,
I think I've just built the practice here now. I'm
yeah,
in these two roles, and although the two board roles are very much flexible, that you can join online, in person, at various offices,
yeah,
extremely possible for me to return to New Zealand and work from there. And I do that remotely,
no, no.
weeks and months anyway. At the moment, no to New Zealand, but it's certainly somewhere where I keep a lot of tabs and
Yeah,
connections and links
yeah,
to, very
yeah,
much so.
yeah. So when you moved to Japan, were you thinking at the time that it was going to be a permanent move, or did you think you would just try it and maybe you'll go back to New Zealand, or what were you thinking at
Just
that time?
try it. Just low risk, 1 year contract. What can go wrong? I remember my dad mapping out the size of my apartment in our garage floor,
Mm,
and it was smaller than the garage. And he said, "Are you sure you're okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I should be fine."
yeah,
It's
yeah.
only a year, Dad. It's only a year. And
Uh-huh.
so it was only a year, but then something else came up, and I thought that would be fun. And I haven't really felt, you don't really taste enough in 1 year in Japan. You really don't even get a taste until 3 years have passed.
Yeah, yeah,
Then you really know if you like it. And once you're here, and if you like it, you stay. If you don't, you will go away and never come
yeah,
back.
yeah,
But most people who come here get the bug and
yeah.
they stay. Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, it's probably very different from New Zealand culture, I'm going to guess. Or would you think it's more similar than one would think, or appearances? What
I
would you
think there's
think?
overlaps, but I would say it's pretty different. I mean, New Zealanders can be reserved, but will still state their opinion quite clearly.
Yeah,
Perhaps Japanese will be a bit more reserved. They'll
yeah.
often do what they call, you've probably heard of nemawashi, which is
Mm,
going around the group to get their opinions first
mm,
before a meeting is held or a decision is made, so that you've
mm,
got a kind of
mm,
consensus, or
mm,
you've worked out where things are, where somebody may not agree
mm,
on something,
mm,
and worked out what that
mm,
is, and,
mm,
and smoothed it over
mm,
until before you come to the
mm.
actual meeting. So there's overlaps, but I think it's very different. Obviously the language and the culture is completely different.
Yeah, totally.
But New Zealand and Japan are similar in that they're both island countries. They both have a lot of shared experiences on even natural disasters,
Mm,
and have helped each other through
mm,
those.
mm,
And
mm,
those kinds of people to people links, your heart to heart, helps actually in business, in the way
mm,
that business is done
mm,
between
mm,
both
mm.
countries, for example. So yes, there were things that, coming here, practical things like not knowing that Japanese houses don't have curtains on their windows when you arrive. So when I moved in my apartment, there were no curtains. So what do you do, right? So there's things like that you never learn, even if you learn Japanese language or culture. There's just things like that that come up that surprise me every day. But it's
Yeah.
certainly a very safe country. It's very reliable. The train system is second to none. Redelivery, if you have someone come to your door and you need them to come back and they say they're coming between 2 and 4, they will come.
Yeah, totally. I was in Japan for 2 weeks last year. It's just
Oh,
an amazing, amazing country. I just,
I'd love to ask you what you loved about it most. Another
Well,
time.
I won't believe it, but the thing that just completely blows my mind after being an American is the public bathrooms. It's just I cannot get over it. I mean, it's just so different and so clean. It's an unbelievable experience. So
Right? And you're just
it's just
all the
nothing more.
same, right? When you get
Yeah,
down to it, you're all the
yeah,
same and nobody really cares,
yeah.
right?
It's really
Yeah.
amazing. So, what are you surprised? I mean, like when you kind of reflect on it, are you surprised how well you adapt to the Japanese culture, given that it is very different, or do you think that you're maybe you were a Japanese hidden inside a
Yeah.
New Zealander body or something like that? Is that how
I
you
think I
describe it?
was. Somebody once did a reading of me. Sounds a bit
Yeah,
woo-woo, but
yeah, yeah.
they said that in my past life, I was a samurai warrior's wife.
Yeah.
So maybe that's it. Maybe I had some connection to it
Yeah,
somehow in the auras or in some universe.
yeah,
But I just feel, it's when in Rome, do as the Romans do, and you bring some of your culture here to encourage a different way of thinking, but you still can't overturn everything that's here, right? I'm
mm,
here at the grace of the Japanese government. They've given me a residency permit. That's great, but I have to also be very observant about the culture here too. So
yeah, yeah,
I think if you rush into Japan and try and change things very suddenly, it's not going to happen. So
yeah,
you need
that's
to be
true.
very observant and careful about the culture, especially as a Westerner here. It really makes a difference if you are careful about the way that you go about things. And that's what's a secret to on the board, right? Is it's not about the knowledge you bring or experience, it's the way you interact with the players around the board.
Yeah, totally.
And if you can't do that well, you're going to be out and you're not going to be respected. And I try and say that to lawyers who come up to me and say, well, if you could do it, I can do it. So, great, go ahead, do it. When you get it, I'll shout you a bottle of champagne and we'll drink it together. But it's not about the skill set. It is, but it's not. It is, because that's of course a given that you've got all of that. How do you convey your thoughts? How do you raise an opinion that might be different to others? And how do you get on with everybody, right? Be maybe a different thinking or a thought, a different way of saying something or a different idea or approach, but how do you do that? The way is always important.
You mentioned, that Toyota and Fujitsu were both looking for a lawyer with your specific skill set. Is that pretty typical of Japanese companies? Because in the US, usually public companies aren't looking for lawyers. Is that true in Japanese companies, or is that just these two in particular?
Lawyers and accountants,
yeah.
CPAs are very popular in Japan at the moment. It's quite hot. Yeah. And also if you have a speciality in SDGs or in a certain area, for example, I guess there's some other areas too that are really popular at the moment, but lawyers have not gone out of fashion. Lawyers are really seen as having the right skill set, the right way of approaching things, very theoretical, but also methodical, and normally have some really good experience, especially if they've been in both private practice and general counsels or worked in legal departments. So they are very popular. Also women. Japan has a deficit of women in general on boards. So it's only at around 12%, 12.1% for them at the moment. And to get to the Japanese government's goals of 30% of women on boards by 2030, we actually need 8,000 women. So many of them, and I know there's about 70% of people are doing multiple boards, 2, 3, or 4. So we'll get there, but that's around more than 20 people a week to be assigned to a board between now and then. So lawyers are very popular. I also encourage any lawyers who are listening to this, who are based in the States, who think they'd like to support a Japanese board, that the bounty is there now for you to grab. As long as you're not doing it for the sake of the remuneration, which is good in Japan, it's much better than it is on an American board from what I've heard. But you have that right cultural heart mentality approach to the way that you're going to help them. Right? You've got to figure out what you are going to support them with, what value you bring. And I mean that not as a token what value you bring, I mean that sincerely.
Yeah, totally. So what is your future plans now? Are you going to stay in Japan? Will you ever move back to New Zealand? Are there other things you want to do with your practice? Be on more boards? What is the future for Catherine O'Connell?
Ooh, that's a good one. I guess that I am staying here for a little while. I get back to New Zealand often. I'll be there 4 times this year, which is good. I believe in the moment. I don't think we can predict the future. And I can't do really anything about the past, obviously, but I can build on that. And I sort of now have been using this chameleon kind of way or portfolio career that I have in law. So I just want those chameleon colors, the colors to get deeper and brighter. Rather than be doing all kinds of different things and be scattered. I want to stick to my knitting. Is that something you know about as an expression? And stick to your lane. Do what I'm being called on for. And so that is board roles, but it also is, there's a lot of coaching and mentoring that I'm being asked to do for women lawyers in Japan. I feel that also I've pushed through this bamboo ceiling. I'm the first foreign female on both of these boards as the statutory auditor. This is an audit and statutory board that I'm on. First in Japanese history of corporates to be on those. I can do it, people can do it. And I feel it's up to me to lead the way, to have the door that I talked about before with my foot in it, so that people can come through, I can pull them through and push them up the ladder through that bamboo ceiling as well. So if I'm not here, Richard, I don't think I can do it. So I want to be here for a while longer, show other women the way, show other male allies the way that they can also be supportive, put my foot in that gap in the door and just continue. I just want to go deeper and brighter and do more of what I'm doing now.
Yeah. Well, Catherine, it's been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate your taking the time. If you do decide to do something else and add to your incredible repertoire, please come back and tell me about it.
Thank you very much for having me.
This is Richard Chu and Catherine O'Connell. Thanks.